Gaines, Gallagher, Cristina Garcia, Eduardo Garcia, Gatto, Gibson, Gomez, Gonzalez, Gordon, Gray, Grove, Hadley, Harper, Hernandez, Holden, Irwin, Jones, Jones Sawyer, Kim, Lackey, Levine, Linder, Lopez, Lowe, Mainshine, Mathis, Mays, McCarty, Medina, Melendez, Mullen, Nazarian, Obernolte, O'Donnell, Olson, Patterson, Perea, Cork, Brendan, Ridley Thomas, Rodriguez, Salas, Santiago, Steinorth, Stone, Thurmond, Ting, Wagner, Waldron, Weber, Wilk, Williams, Wood. Madam Speaker.
Members, a quorum is present. Can you please take your seats? Thank you, members. We will defer the prayer and the pledge until a little bit later in the session. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Tuesday, April 14, 2015. The Assembly met at 7 a.m. Honorable Mark Steinor.
Mr. Holden moves. Ms. Waldron seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Moving to motions and resolutions. Absences, there are no absences for today. Mr. Holden, you're recognized for your motions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 and allow Assembly members Ashajian, Frazier, Gatto, Nazarian, Rendon, and Wilk to have guests and photographers on the floor today. Many of the guests will be in the area of the members' desk and at the rostrum as we remember the Armenian genocide of 1915.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 and allow Assembly members Dodd, Frazier, Kim, Patterson, and Ridley Thomas to speak on adjourned memories today.
Without objection.
Pursuant to Assembly Rule 96, I request unanimous consent to re-refer the following bills to committee. Assembly Bill 266 Cooley from the Business and Professions Committee and the Labor and Employment Committee to the Business and Professions Committee only. Assembly Bill 1017 Campos from the Labor and Employment Committee to the Rules Committee. Assembly Bill 1229 Campos from the Housing and Community Development Committee to the Revenue and Taxation Committee then back to the Housing and Community Development Committee upon passage. Assembly Bill 1386, low, from the Business and Professions Committee to the Rules Committee, and Assembly Bill 1492, low, from the Insurance Committee to the Rules Committee.
Without objection, the requests are granted.
I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 56 and allow the Elections and Redistricting Committee to notice AB 1461 Gonzalez on its regularly scheduled hearing on Wednesday, April 29, 2015, pending re-referral from the Transportation Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 56 and allow the Housing and Community Development Committee to notice Assembly Bill 1229 Compost on its regularly scheduled hearing on Wednesday, April 29, 2015, pending re-referral from the Revenue and Taxation Committee.
Without objection, the request is granted.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to add Senator Kevin De Leon as a principal co-author on file item 62, AJR 2, Nazarian.
Without objection, the request is granted.
At the request of Ms. Waldron, please remove the following bills from the consent calendar. File item 67, AB 195, Chow. File item 79, Assembly Bill 489, Gonzalez. File item 80, AB 503, Rodriguez.
Clerk will note.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Members, in honor of the 100th anniversary of the tragedy of the Armenian genocide, let me invite our colleague, Assemblyman Kacho Asajian, to the rostrum to preside during this part of session. Mr. Asajian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will move to the Armenian Genocide Remembrance Ceremony. We will now move to special ceremony in remembrance of the Armenian Genocide of 1915. Would our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and the gallery please stand for the prayer? Without objection, this afternoon prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, His Eminence Archbishop Michel Mardirosyan, Prelate of the Western Prelacy of the Armenian Apostolic Church of America. Archbishop Mardirosyan.
Lord Almighty, we thank you for the blessing of this day, as we have gathered once again here at the California State Capitol to join this esteemed group of legislators and fellow citizens to honor the memory of the 1.5 million victims of the Armenian genocide on this centennial year commemoration. As our history continues to be denied and refuted by modern-day Turkey and its allies, we are grateful for friends and supporters such as those in the California State Legislature who designate this time each year to pay tribute to our martyrs and raise awareness of the truth of the Armenian genocide and our just cause. May you bless them abundantly for their righteous stance and lead them to continued successes in their commendable service toward the prosperity of our beloved home state. Today, we remember and pray also for the souls of all victims of genocide. And for those subjected to similar atrocities today, we pray for their safety and well-being. May there come a time when all the peoples of the world can live amongst one another in peace, as brothers and sisters of one and the same human family. Lord, on this historic 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, we turn to you for strength, perseverance, and patience as we continue our struggle for universal recognition and justice. We owe it to our martyrs to keep their legacy alive, and we owe it to all victims and survivors of genocide so that history does not keep repeating itself. May the memory of our faithful departed remain ever blessed. May your blessing and protection be upon the leadership, armed forces, and citizenry of this great land we are proud to call home, and may you keep us in peace under your loving care and mercy. Amen. Thank you.
Please remain standing as the Home and Scouts present the colors of the flag salute. Please present the colors. We ask our guests and visitors to please join us for the flag salute. Join Assembly Member Holden as he leads us in the pledge.
Please join me in a salute to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and you may be seated. Thank you, and be seated, please. At this time, we will move to file item number 62, AJR2 Nazarian, for the purpose of third reading. Mr. Nazarian, are you ready to proceed on this item? The clerk will read AJR2.
Assembly Joint Resolution 2 by Assemblymember Nazarian and others relative to the Armenian Genocide.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And dear colleagues, AJR2 designates 2015 as the California Year of Commemoration for the Centennial of the Armenian Genocide. This resolution pays homage to the 1.5 million victims that were systematically killed at the hands of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, then the Republic of Turkey. When you think of 1.5 million, it's hard to capture that number, what it really means. Prior to the genocide, there were roughly about 2 million Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire. Within a short period of time, 3/4 of the population was perished, and an ancient lineage was nearly obliterated. What we are really speaking about is millions of stories never being told, future generations being eliminated, doctors, lawyers, contributors to society, folks who would have helped create certain medicines, moved the culture forward, all gone. Struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. Milan Kundera. Colleagues, I have come across a publication recently from 1918, Red Cross publication, which contains a memoir of the American ambassador to Turkey at the time, Mr. Henry Morgenthau. Stationed in Constantinople, Ambassador Morgenthau was an eyewitness to the deportations, massacres, and genocide of the Armenians. The chilling details lie in the words of Mr. Morgenthau himself. Homes were literally uprooted, men killed, women and girls violated daily. Orders given to the governors to send into exile the entire Armenian population, irrespective of age and sex. Children thrown into the river, their stories never told, future generations lost. In reflecting on the world's failure to act decisively against the genocide, he asks, Will definite steps be promptly taken to rescue permanently the remnants of these fine old civilized people from the Turks? 100 years later, ironically, we are faced with similar examples of indifference demonstrated by world powers at the turn of the 20th century. In fact, it was Ambassador Morgenthau's personal telegram to the Secretary of State that sparked the American-led relief campaign, the Nearest Relief, which we recognized in our chambers earlier this year, which helped save more than 1 million Armenians and over 132 orphans of the Armenian genocide. This country stood up then and came to the aid of a starving, massacred, and innocent people because it was the right thing to do. It was the ideals and spirit of humanity, philanthropy, and love for mankind that led this country to operate the Nearest Relief for 15 consecutive years, which was unprecedented in our nation, and it still remains to hold the record. Isn't it time we return to revive those values and acknowledge what our ancestors did for the Armenian people? I cannot help but to remember the pointed words of Dr. Martin Luther King when he so accurately stated, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Despite the fact that a century has passed, many are speaking up for Armenians. They are speaking out about the inability to heal wounds, about the pursuit of justice, about mankind's indifference to the unspeakable suffering of an innocent people. They are speaking about denial. From every corner of the world, from Europe to Asia to America, they are speaking about denial. Pope Francis said it best recently during a Mass in the Vatican when he stated concealing or denying evil is like allowing a wound to keep bleeding without bandaging it. The message has never been clearer. Statements such as these represent what Armenians have endured since 1915 at the cost of genocidal denial. The time has come to begin the slow, painful process of healing. This process begins simply with calling what occurred 100 years ago simply by the name. It was genocide. Leaders of Turkey today deny that a genocide ever took place. By attempting to conceal the truth and by continuing to use rhetoric that suggests they are unwilling to acknowledge their bloody past, it is clear they intend to carry on the same approach for the next 100 years, unless they are pressured to come to terms with their history. Turkey's reaction of recalling its ambassador to the Vatican over Pope Francis' statement speaks volumes about its plans to accept its own history and the country's plans to genuinely reconcile. In its own country, Turkey continuously attacks, threatens, and punishes its own citizenry to silence anyone who speaks openly about the Armenian genocide. Such examples include historian Taner Akçam, who's been a prominent figure and has been in the United States speaking at many universities, and ironically, the grandson of one of the three architects of the Armenian genocide, Hassan Cemal, who was the editor of a well-known established Turkish newspaper, the Hurriyet newspaper. After coming to the United States and in Los Angeles and speaking about the atrocities his father has been the architect of and apologizing publicly to the Armenian community, he went back to his country only to find out that he had lost his job. And of course, the slain journalist Hrant Dink, who was assassinated in front of his workplace in January of 2007. I'd like to leave you with the words of Vasily Grossman, a survivor who lost his mother during the Holocaust. Human history is not the battle of good struggling to overcome evil. It is a battle fought by a great evil struggling to crush a small kernel of human kindness. But if what is human in human beings has not been destroyed even now, then evil will never conquer. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Assembly Member. At this time, I will call on other members to speak. Mr. Gatto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, in an attempt to personalize the horrors of the Armenian genocide to span the intervening decades, I relate on this floor the moving stories that were experienced by the ancestors of people we all know, people who work here in this building. I hope many of you will share those experiences too, and I asked all of us to put ourselves in their shoes, and I know that all of us did. Their intense physical suffering was hard to imagine, but with a genocide, there's also spiritual suffering, a toll that is taken on the psyche that must have been nearly impossible to bear. In his memoir, the late British journalist Christopher Hitchens wrote of an encounter he had with a woman who had miraculously survived the genocide in Rwanda. And he wrote, "There was now nobody left on the face of the earth, either friend or relative, who knew who she was. No one who remembered her girlhood or her early mischief or family lore. No sibling, no companion who could tease her about her first romance, no lover or no pal with whom to reminisce. All of her birthdays, her exam results, her illnesses, her friendships, her kinships were gone. She went on living, but with a blank slate as her diary and as her calendar and as her notebook." Can you imagine? Can you imagine waking up in a world where nobody knows your name? Can you imagine waking up in a world where the place you came from was attempted to be erased? Can you imagine waking up in a world where every possession and keepsake was gone? That feeling is unimaginable, and we wonder how man could do that to fellow man. And yet you'll notice this reference that I just read was from the Rwandan genocide, something that happened during all of our lifetimes. Now, why is that? Why is it that genocides still occur? Well, I think we all know the answer why. In the last 100 years, mankind has invented jet airplanes and computers and sent rocket ships to the moon. We have cured or eradicated countless diseases, and we have seen miracle-like progress for treating everything from infertility to deafness. We can now have a video conversation with perfect clarity using a device that we hold in our hand. Yet in the last 100 years, humanity has come a long way. But apparently, we can't agree on the definition of the word genocide. Certain countries, including ours, still do not wish to call the great crime a genocide. And the perpetrators still deny it happened with such a fervor that they will recall an ambassador to a tiny nation where a man of God dared to speak the truth. We all know that others chose to model their terrible acts on the Armenian genocide. And I wonder here today whether the converse is also true. That if mankind can agree on the concept of genocide as it pertains to the events of 1915 to 1923, will we have taken a huge step forward to preventing others? Colleagues, look up in the gallery and to the back of the chamber. We're joined here today by the descendants for whom the horror of genocide was a chilling reality. We stand here together 100 years after the genocide began, unified in our demand that the world do what we here in California do each year, to mark this occasion, to call it what it was, to commemorate the losses both to the Armenian people and to humankind. Such remembrances not only honor the memories of our lost brothers and sisters, but they serve as a call to future generations to fight injustice and seek peace in an ever-complicated and ever-changing world.
Thank you, Member Brigado. Member Calderon, you recognized at your desk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today, we all need to take a moment to think about justice, about what it means and why it's important. Justice is the most fundamental virtue of our society. It's what we fight for every day up here as lawmakers. We value equal opportunity and fairness. We embrace diversity. We believe in a just society. It's a painful reality that too often, throughout our history, we fail to defend the fundamental humanity of our neighbors, to demand justice, whether it's across the street or across the globe. The murder of Turkish-Armenian journalist Hrant Dink in 2007 symbolizes the continuing violence against Armenians in Turkey. In response to increased international pressure on Turkey to end its shameful campaign of denial of the Armenian genocide, the Turkish Prime Minister recently threatened to deport all Armenians. In response to increased in 1915, this is still happening. This is no longer 1915, this is today, and this is still happening. And it's happening because far too many people and far too many countries are complicit. Failure to act for good is tantamount to acting for evil. We stand firm on this principle. Today we join Armenian Americans across the great state of California, and we stand with the entire Armenian nation to mourn the murder of over 1.5 million lives and the loss of an ancestral homeland, and to demand justice for a crime gone unpunished. I urge your support for AJR 2, and I'd like to thank the author for bringing it up today.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon. Mr. Jones-Sawyer, you're recognized at your desk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I rise in support of AJR 2 and our brothers and sisters from the Armenian community. We have a moral obligation to use these occasions to remind us of our commitment to prevent these cruelties from ever occurring again, and to shame those who would deny that these acts of inhumanity ever happened. While it is important for us to recall these historic and dreadful crimes against humanity, we should also reflect on the growth that we have made as a nation. Colleagues, as we remember these historical failures of our past and pay homage to the victims and recognize the courage of those who survived, we need to remember so we do not ever repeat them again. Members, I strongly request an aye vote on AJR 2.
Thank you, Member Sawyer. Ms. Garcia, you recognize at your desk.
Mr. Speaker, members, guests, I rise today as the Vice Chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus to support AJR 2. And I rise today proudly representing the 50th Assembly District that is home to a vibrant Armenian population in Montebello, and the home of the Armenian Genocide Martyrs Monument, the first of its kind. It was built in my district in Bignell Park in Montebello in 1968 to honor the martyrs of the Armenian genocide, as well as all victims of crimes against humanity. With each passing year, we are learning more about the atrocities of the Armenian genocide, but there's still more to learn, and this is especially true when addressing the inhumanity faced by Armenian women during the genocide that began a century ago. The story of Armenian women is the story of those who marched as part of the men, women, and children who were forced to march to their deaths or exile. And it's also a story of women who didn't perish, but were forced to live lives of shame and horror as they watched their fathers, husbands, brothers, and children die needlessly while they were left behind to live lives as sex slaves and as forced wives of others. The suffering of Armenian women from the rape and the forced tattooing of the Turkish Muslim flag to their faces and hands during the Armenian genocide has been kept silent inside many families because of the ongoing shame that these women have felt for having been raped, violated, exposed, and sullied. These actions of the perpetrators did not attack these women only physically, but usurped, degraded, and violated the very dignity and sanctity of their privacy. Armenian women suffer greatly. They were the ones who paid a terrible price. It's our responsibility to stand as we are today, to bring light to the history of all Armenians and the atrocities that fell to the men and the women 100 years ago. But 100 years later, we also stand to highlight the importance of the spirit of the Armenian people. The ability to persevere in spite of the darkness that is part of the rich history is seen like the likes of those who live today. But especially in women like feminist Anita Sarkeesian, entertainer K.R. Mann, Cher, and Andrea Martin, journalist Anna Kasparian, Larissa Setrakian, and Janice Shamilian, authors like Nancy Kerkorian, and legal mind attorney Marcia Kasaronian. The first female promoted to Master Chief Petty Officer in the U.S. Navy was Armenian Anna Thervantinian. Thank you, members, and I urge support for this important resolution.
Thank you, Member Garcia. Mr. DeBobne, you're recognized at your desk.
Mr. Speakers, colleagues, and distinguished guests, today we gather to mark the 100th anniversary of the first genocide of the 20th century. There are nearly 1 million Armenian Americans living in California, most of who are direct descendants of the genocide survivors. These are the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the surviving generation. They have sown new roots in our state, thriving as a successful community that contributes to the diverse fabric that weaves us together as Californians. Out of respect to this community and the victims of historical injustices around the world, it is incumbent upon not only California, but the United States to uphold the universal values of human rights and morality. Our nation should not serve as an enabler of genocide denial, nor should it serve as an accomplice to covering up the systematic murder of 1.5 million innocent civilians. I urge President Obama and Congress to join with the 43 states and numerous other countries around the world that have already recognized the Armenian genocide and pass a resolution this year. With an overwhelming amount of scholarship that leaves no doubt about the crimes committed in 1915, we can agree that the Armenian genocide is not a matter of historical debate. Over the past few days, Pope Francis and the European Parliament and countless respectable publications have all condemned the denial of the 1915 Armenian genocide by the Turkish government. I urge my colleagues to join me and vote yes on AJR 1 and AJR 2 so that we may too, in a bipartisan way, push forward for a more tolerant future based on the foundations of truth and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeBobne. Mr. Living, you're recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. On behalf of the Jewish Caucus, I rise in support of AJR 2. Last week, we remembered the Holocaust. We also remembered the massacre of the Sikhs in India. Today, we must remember the Armenian genocide. It is necessary, it is appropriate that we formally recognize these atrocities perpetrated against humanity. Through this recognition, we remember and honor those whose lives were brutally taken. If we do not recognize, we do not heal, and we do not learn, and the consequences that our global community is doomed to repeat. We only need to look at the words of Adolf Hitler as an example of why we need to remember the Armenian genocide, the first genocide of the 20th century. In 1939, Hitler was justifying the invasion of Poland, triggering World War II and the Holocaust, and in making his case, Hitler asserted that history would not condemn his actions. He said, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" To be clear, there is no question about the brutality from 1915 to 1923 in the Caucasus. In 1997, the International Association of Genocide Scholars declared unanimously that the massacre of Armenians was a crime of genocide. Denial of this historical fact prevents healing, it denies survivors and their descendants closure, and it creates an environment where atrocities can continue. In 1918, American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau, met with Talat Pasha, one of the architects of the genocide. Talat Pasha asked Morgenthau, "Why are you so interested in the Armenians anyway? You are a Jew. They are Christians." Ambassador Morgenthau replied, "You don't seem to realize that I am not here as a Jew, but as the American ambassador. I do not appeal to you in the name of any race or religion, but merely as a human being. As human beings, we must all remember the Armenian genocide, and I ask for your support of AJR 2.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Mr. Alejo, you're recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and our invited guest. The 22 members of the Latino Legislative Caucus joins Assemblymember Nazarian and members of the Armenian Legislative Caucus in supporting this resolution to mark the centennial commemoration of the Armenian genocide. This resolution highlights 100 years of triumph, resilience, and perseverance of the Armenian people in California and all over the world. The systematic and premeditated massacres, forced deportation marches, and deaths due to disease in concentration camps resulted in the killings of over 1.5 million ethnic Armenian people from 1915 to 1923. This tragedy has recently been acknowledged by Pope Francis as the first genocide of the 20th century, and he asked the international community to recognize it as such. Pope Francis said that concealing or denying evil is like allowing a wound to keep bleeding without bandaging it. And as we reflect upon these crimes against humanity, we must draw inspiration from the beauty, the unity, and strength of over 1 million Armenians in California and those around the world who are descendants of genocide survivors. I'm honored to be part of this commemoration ceremony today, and I join all those individuals in honoring their fallen ancestors. I'm also proud to join hands with our Armenian colleagues and their families of our great state of California continues its important and respectful tradition of remembering and recognizing the Armenian genocide, and respectfully calls upon our federal government to do the same.